in The Guardian, this was back at the start of the month, heralded the defection of this supposed pro-Assad journalist in Syria called Hatan Slaber. They called it a great blow to the regime, when in fact, over the past couple of days, it's emerged that the journalist claimed he worked for a news organization in Syria that was pro-Assad. Turns out he never worked for them at all. He applied for the job and was turned away. Yet the BBC and The Guardian jumped on it and said, oh my God, look at this. We've got journalists, even journalists defecting in Syria now. All turned out to be complete crap. Never happened, never worked for the organization. But, you know, there's no retraction. They just move on to the next piece of propaganda. Shifting to world news. Iranian Ayatollah, war within weeks. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, told top Iranian military chiefs to expect war within weeks at a recent War Council meeting, according to Israeli news outlet Debka File. On July 27, just before Friday's prayers, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, summoned top Iranian military chiefs for what he called, quote, the last War Council. Quote, we'll be at war within weeks, he told the gathering. Debka File's exclusive Iranian sources disclosed. So, of course, we had the fairly substantive reports from a few months back about how the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities had been delayed till spring 2013. But in more recent weeks, we've had this kind of parallel narrative that Obama and Israel are gearing up for an assault on Iran's nuclear facilities in October, which could act, of course, as the October surprise. So, I mean, we've got two narratives. Who knows? I mean, it is Debka File. Sometimes they're stunningly accurate. You know, they predicted the precise time in which the overthrow of Gaddafi would take place. They got that right. Sometimes they just make stuff up. Sometimes it's just Mossad propaganda, so it can go either way. What we do know for a fact is that the plan to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which, you know, 33% of the world's oil passes, has been finalized by Iran. They came out last week and said it's done, it's ready, we can close it down on a whim. Of course, you've got the underwater mine ships that the US has dispatched to the region. You've got the USS Enterprise and Eisenhower aircraft carriers never far away. So the tension continues to build, but more speculation. We hear it almost every year about an attack on Iran, possibly coming up in October, if not spring next year. But, you know, from these reports, Iran is prepared, and they're prepared for war within weeks in the time frame of September or October. Switching to domestic news now. ABC to run drama demonizing militias. In keeping with the federal government's ongoing effort to cast state militias in a sinister light, ABC has given the go-ahead to Hollywood darlings Lorenzo D. Bonaventura and Dan McDermott to produce a drama demonizing a fictional Texas militia. The network has bought drama pitch Founding Fathers from D. Bonaventura Pictures and ABC Studios. Written by feature scribe Rich Dovidio, Founding Fathers is described as Donnie Brasco set in the world of Texas militias. Neil Andreeva writes for Deadline Hollywood. It centers on Nick Keating, who after serving a third tour in Afghanistan, returns home to find his small Texas town under the control of a militia group led by his older foster brother. After being seduced by the militia's surprisingly community-based motives, he accepts a rare invitation to join the group. But unbeknownst to his new family, Nick has a secret agenda that will put his life in jeopardy and lead him to question his allegiances. So again, the symbiotic relationship between television producers and the federal government continues apace. Of course, this ties in perfectly to the agenda to demonize politically active libertarians and conservatives as domestic extremists, as you've seen in the MIAC report, the DHS report, the DHS-funded National Terrorism Report, which listed conservatives, libertarians as extremists, while, of course, completely omitting the fact that the terrorism carried out in the United States has been blamed mostly on Muslims. They were not mentioned at all in these recent reports. So we're back again to demonizing the deadly militias. Of course, we had the Hutari militia, who, of course, were arrested in a blaze of publicity, supposedly planning to wage war against the US government, according to the bellicose media reports at the time. And of course, what happened? Well, they were all released without charge. But, you know, You didn't hear about that quite as much, did you, when they were all released without charge and the whole story collapsed, as it routinely does with every act of terrorism inside the United States, most of which, of course, as the New York Times now admits, are provocateur by the FBI. But these TV drama shows basically exist to just demonize liberty-minded people. I mean, you've seen CSI breaking every law in the Constitution to solve the crime and catch the bad guy. You know, we've had Ron Paul supporters characterized as drug-dealing terrorists, innumerable other examples of this. And it's just more of the same. It's more of the same DHS agenda. You know, they put out the PSA videos where every terrorist is a white middle-class American. It's all heading in that direction. It's the war against middle-class America. And we're going to be doing a big report on this for our magazine that we've got coming out soon. So look out for that. The DHS, in association with TV producers, continues its war against politically active, conservative and libertarian Americans. Death from above. Navy drone logo features Grim Reaper. The US Navy, which has just revealed the latest development in stealth drone technology, is using a logo for its unmanned aviation program that literally features the Angel of Death, clothed in a black cloak with a hood, holding aloft a large scythe. Oh, this is the freedom that we're raining down with the drones. The Angel of Death. The logo for the Navy's program Executive Office for Unmanned Aviation Strike Weapons was photographed and posted to Instagram by Wired writer Spencer Ackerman. And so remember, as we talked about earlier, while the US supports al-Qaeda terrorists in Libya and Syria, applauds their bombings in Damascus, Ambassador Susan Rice, they're celebrating the fact that, you know, they're going after the real bad guys by painting up these drones with an image of the Grim Reaper with red glowing eyes and a big scythe above his head. Because they can be confident that they're going after the real bad guys with these drones, you know, like little kids in Pakistan and wedding parties in Afghanistan and things like that. Because that's who's being killed by these drones. And I actually picked out this US Army chant in Iraq, which was revealed by Josh Steiber, who was a conscientious objector upon his return from Iraq. He actually fought in Iraq. And this is what US troops in Iraq sing, bearing in mind they're now painting drones with the Grim Reaper image. This is what they sing in Iraq. I went down to the market where all the women shop. I pulled out my machete and I began to chop. I went down to the park where all the children play. I pulled out my machine gun and I began to spray. That's Operation Liberation Freedom in Iraq. That's what US troops chant in Iraq, according to Josh Steiber, who served in Iraq. And there's another out, the LA Times. This was from 1989. This is what they chant at Camp Pendleton. 1, 2, 3, 4, every night we pray for war. 5, 6, 7, 8, rape, kill, mutilate. That's what US troops chant at Camp Pendleton, reported the LA Times. So, I mean, this is why America has lost its legitimacy. Do you think the soldiers that fought at Iwo Jima in World War II, you know, joked and chanted about chopping up little Japanese kids? I don't think they did. Because they were fighting, at least what they thought they were fighting for was something good. They were fighting against the Nazis and their Axis allies. They had some level of dignity. Now we've got troops in Iraq chanting about how they like to chop women up and spray kids with machine guns. We've got troops at Camp Pendleton chanting about how they want to rape, kill and mutilate people. So is it really any surprise that the drones that rain down even more death are now being painted with an image of the Grim Reaper? That's what it's all about. Hardly about spreading democracy, is it? Now, moving on. Is this the most truthful 4-minute newscast about the Federal Reserve ever? Let's go to the clip.
The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 wasn't drafted by Congress. It was drafted under great secrecy in a meeting of associates of very powerful men. The Fed was drafted with 5 objectives. Number 1, to stop competition from newer banks. 2, to obtain a franchise to create money out of nothing for the purpose of lending. 3, to get control of all the reserves of other banks so that reckless banks wouldn't be overrun. 4, to shift the losses from the banks to the taxpayers. And 5, to convince Congress that the purpose was to protect the public.
And you remember we played a clip from this same news anchor last week where he was talking about the Batman massacre there in Colorado and all the anomalies with that, you know, the reports of 2 shooters and everything else that goes with it, the proficiency that James Holmes had in rigging his apartment with explosives, even though he knew nothing about the subject. So you've got to say kudos to Ben Swann, and I think this is Fox 19 out of Cincinnati, for having the balls to air some actual truth on mainstream news network television. Because when it happens, it's happened elsewhere, and usually the people do it are off the air within weeks. Remember the Young Turks guy from MSNBC? He started talking about just a little bit of truth. Within weeks, he was hauled into a meeting by MSNBC bosses and told the people in Washington don't like what you're saying. You've got to stop this. You've got to stop telling the truth. And much to his credit, he refused, and he was yanked off the air within weeks, even though his program was one of the most popular shows on MSNBC. So either, you know, these guys are having to adapt or die, I guess. That's the point I made last time, because they don't want to end up like CNN, you know, completely pathetic with no viewers, sank another 20% again just in the past few days, according to the latest figures. So they're being forced to tell at least some of the truth. So Ben Swann and his reality check are at least serving that function on mainstream news network television. So it's kudos to him, and we hope that this segment continues to throw up some of these intriguing stories and at least inject a little bit of truth into the mainstream news network paradigm. Now, of course, Ted Cruz recently defeated David Dewhurst. Much of his support was surrounding the fact that he was central in the fight against the TSA. And Richard Reeves, our reporter, interviewed Ted Cruz a while back, so we're going to go to that interview now.
There is a bill for impeachment of Barack Obama right now, started by Walter Jones of North Carolina.
My view is we've got to focus on how we actually move the ball forward. As long as the Democrats control the Senate, impeachment won't happen. Harry Reid is killing everything in the Senate. So we've got to focus on what we can actually get done, and what we can get done is we can vote him out in November, and we can bring in strong conservative leaders, because we need to not just stop this explosion of government power and spending, we need to turn it back and roll it back. And that's what I intend to lead the fight to do. I'll give you an example of something that I think is an outright disgrace, and that's the Fast and Furious program. The Fast and Furious program, we had our federal government, the U.S. Department of Justice, knowingly, willingly, deliberately selling guns to Mexican drug cartels, and those guns were used to murder innocent civilians and at least one federal law enforcement officer. Now, I have been calling for months, initially for an investigation of Eric Holder, then for Eric Holder to be fired, and I believe the House should impeach Eric Holder right now. And that we need to stand and fight, but we need to have a president who respects the Constitution. If you have a president that will trample on the Constitution, liberty will inevitably be the victim.
Quote of the day on InfoWars Nightly.